Today, I'm so delighted to have a special guest as we continue the conversation as design leaders navigating the big changes in business and technology today. So, welcome Suzanne Pellican, who's VP of UX at Google, who's been serving there for the last 8 years. We're so delighted to have one of our members join us to further enrich the perspectives we're going to have access to in this podcast. So, welcome back also, Kaaren. Welcome back, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hello, everyone.
So today we're going to go straight into kind of this sense of enormous change, fast pacedness of how fast technology is moving. Suzanne, I think you have such a great way to kind of frame this moment. So help us kind of like paint a little bit. What is that mixture of exhilaration and yet also a sense of like, this unsettling feeling as technology is changing?
Yeah, well, we were just chatting about this before you hit record, but I think that this is like an extraordinary time. Some of us, and we should reflect back on it a little bit, have been through many, many waves of change over the years in the industry, and this one is a little bit unlike the others as far as how fast things are changing. I mean, practically like every day, and as we were discussing, it's the models are catching up to our imagination in remarkable ways. In some manner, like they're surpassing what we would expect them to even do. And I think that just makes for like really interesting times as a design leader of like, well, what do you like? How do you think about that? Like, how do you actually articulate problems? And actually, how do you start going about solutioning when the thing that can help you solution is actually advancing at times almost at the pace of your own creativity, sometimes beyond your creativity, and helping to like help you think differently. And I think that that's really, really interesting. It can be both very exciting and exhilarating, and at the same time it's like whoa, wait, can everything just give me a minute, like give me a minute to catch up. And it's not forgiving that way. No one's going to wait around for us to catch up. It's going to keep going.
Well,
When you
and what I
say,
think about that as well is that, Gordon, when you talked a little bit about what are the past experiences we've had, and that is a consistent feeling throughout the previous transitions. And it feels like it takes a while for people to get into it. And then once they think they've got it, then it still takes them longer to really become fluid with it and really get serious about it. And that is exactly what's happening now. It's just probably 10 times faster at each point.
That's right.
And I was reflecting on that because when Suzanne and I were both at Intuit, it was part of when we went from really SaaS and desktop to mobile. And it was a really hard thing for our company to get its head around that we were going to be mobile first. And so just declaring we're going to be mobile first or just declaring we're going to use AI really doesn't get us anywhere. And I remember one of the pivotal moments was when the design team went to the executive offsite and we brought phones for everybody that had some of the latest apps on them, whether it was WordLens or it was, a translation app. It might have been Google Translate or a map, which was novel at the time, and maybe scanning a barcode. And we sent them on a scavenger hunt, and they had to use these phones we had given them with these apps in order to do tasks, in order to get where they needed to go. And then we had them spend time interviewing small businesses that were already running their businesses on mobile. And this is when mobile was pretty much garbage in most places. And then they all got to take the phones home with them so they would start to use them with these new apps on them. And it took all of that and beyond just to get it. So we were starting to do mobile maybe 5% of the time or with 10% of the resources, right? And then it had to keep being a push. And it took a while to get there. And move to mobile was much slower. The technology itself moved much more slower than AI is using. But I reflect back on that, and that was literally a change management of years, right, Suzanne?
That's right. That was right. And I took that playbook to Google. We did the same thing when I was on the Google Maps team. It was like, okay, let's get on planes and go to different parts of the world and use our products and try to use our products on the devices that are available in those parts of the world, And then let's see if you can get around. And we did the same thing. We did all these like scavenger hunts. We had all these executives who thought that they understood like, oh, this product will, of course it's going to work great in Delhi. And until we put them in Delhi and then we can't get around, and they keep hitting all these like issues. It was very easy for us to take the time. It wasn't easy, but it was actually, doable for us to actually take the time to actually help bring empathy and clarity to executives and decision makers and designers and product leaders and engineers to say, look, you are wanting to do all of this, but let's just ground ourselves in what real humans are doing. And at the time, like, yes, it would be quarters of work. You'd take people to these places and then, you would then set up your strategy doc and then you would like plan for next year's roadmap. Well, there's no way like anybody is actually taking the same approach today. I mean, we're barely able to keep up with the tools ourselves today, let alone like, how do I get this into the hands of like, everybody else? And so it's just like it's less coordinated, less thoughtful, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I agree. I've lived through the same, mobile transformation at Microsoft at the time, right after we were acquired, and I led the kind of revamp of all the mobile applications. And I think one thing that you both are pointing out is the fact that we had to first learn to live with the technology to figure out, what behavioral changes would happen or would be required. I remember we established a 15-second rule that you had to be able to, basically perform the basic task within 10 to 15 seconds. That became the normal kind of expectation. Working on the phone because you were on the go, you had one hand typically only available, like all of those things that we basically do every day, thousands of times every day today and take for granted. And it's I think a great segue or something I just read. I mentioned it before we started recording, an article that came out from two Princeton professors 4 days ago that touches a little bit on what they call, amongst a lot of things in this article, speed bumps, where the AI technology is now hitting the real world. And where I think the case they're making, the headline of the article is AI is normal technology. And the goal is to demystify a lot of the hype that's currently happening and making a case for, on the one hand, the gap is probably much bigger in terms of how quickly the adoption is happening and also how big the technology itself is. But at the same time, we're still in the situation where we have to experience this technology and figure out how we make it useful. Because we have all of these benchmarks, all of these mathematical benchmarks that are, as Suzanne was saying, blowing our minds in terms of what the technology can do. But we still need to apply it in the real world. So the question then becomes, what are those new exercises that we need to do in order to expose ourselves and our organizations to this technology and how to make it useful? How do we apply it?
Well, I'm just going to build on that. And we just did some research that was really humbling, because clearly, like here in the Bay Area, like we are in a massive bubble. And so we assume that there's far more adoption than there actually is. Let's be clear. And so I have family in Ohio, and people that have family around the world. And it's like, we're talking about AI like all day, every day. And they're like, I've never even used it. Like, what? I don't even know how to use it. I don't know. Am I using it? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, what are you doing? What are you not doing? And yes, you are actually exposed to it in these use cases for sure. And they're just unawares. And I think that your point, Ben, is like so profoundly important. It's that even at the pace of the technology advancing, it is largely inaccessible to the vast majority of the humans on this planet. It is still a concept, a theory, a buzzword, and also scary to a lot of people. They don't know what to do with it. And so that just provides like enormous opportunity for us as design leaders to, remain humble in that, make sure that our product partners and our executives understand that, and make sure that we do the work to make it something that people can access, right? And everyday humans can access around the globe, and that it is helpful.
Well, and the other thing that strikes me too is I was recently out of the Bay Area, and I was talking to some designers, and I was like, "Oh, well, have you guys been playing with Cursor?" And you guys are like, "Yeah, everybody knows Cursor." They're like, "Never heard of it." Right? And I was like, "Okay, so that might be replacing Figma in like 2 seconds."
Yeah.
Right? I mean, maybe not. I'm certainly not making any predictions, but it was also really interesting to me because you're right, Suzanne. Like we feel like this is normal.
Yeah.
And it's not yet, but it will be.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from what I read in that article, just going back to it for a second, and we can probably link it in the show notes because it's truly, I think, really insightful and useful. Adoption is in fact higher than any other transformational technology before, and yet it is still by far not something that most people use, or even a majority uses every day. On the flip side, though, and I think that is another interesting point to probably discuss. A lot of people are indirectly already exposed to AI, right? And oftentimes, not necessarily in a positive way. And I think that's one of the negative side effects of this technology is that it is so fastly developing and that it is so broadly applicable that it can be misused very quickly. And I think. Sorry?
Do you have a concrete example?
Well, I mean, all the algorithmic exposure that we have just using apps like Instagram, right? And the downside effects of that, or misinformation that is spreading faster than it has ever, in any geopolitical context at the moment, where generative AI is broadly used to drive that, right? Like the speed at which you can produce deep fakes or fake information, is drastically accelerating and has over the last few years since the public deployment of generative AI. So I think to Suzanne's point, our opportunity as design leaders is to find useful application. On the one hand, I think to build trust in the technology, make it accessible, and on the flip side, I think on the development of ethical frameworks of really giving input and how do we not only make it useful for people, but also how do we not harm people in the deployment of this technology. So I think it's that I don't want to call it paradox, but the dichotomy probably that's really interesting right now.
And just to kind of bring it back, and I'm thinking about also the listeners here. And Suzanne, you said something about the imagination, like it's catching up, but at the same time, you see on the other side, customer adoption, speed bumps. And so I think a lot about like that Venn diagram of like, certainly there's the appetite, and now there's the technology capacity to realize those things. But to both of your stories, your families, your friends out in very different bubbles outside Silicon Valley are like, what is this? And so I'm thinking about that intersection of the challenge isn't so much the why, as we were highlighting in the first design executive briefing, but where to invest this and how to apply it that is meaningful to the customers they're serving. So would love to jump into that a little bit because I think that's such a superpower that makes it very tangible for any design leader listening to be like, what do I do today? Is moving so fast, but there's also the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I sit in the ads business at Google. It's a very broad ecosystem, lots and lots of different players in the ecosystem we're solving for every day, all day. Everything from like consumers looking at ad formats on YouTube and search, but also we create all the ad tooling, right? All the buying doors for advertisers, analytic toolings, but we also do a lot of the seller and support agent tooling as well. So it's like there's just a lot that we actually design and to support many, many people in this ecosystem. I think it's some of the most rewarding work is actually taking the power of this technology and transforming the value that we can actually give to any given constituent in that ecosystem. So I'll give you a couple of good examples. Like a couple of years ago, this is not like yesterday, it's like part of our strategy was a few years ago. It's like, how do you take AI and actually drive automation and better performance for advertisers, right? Because actually trying to get the highest level performance is a very, very difficult thing to figure out. Like based on your goals, based on your bidding strategy, based on your targeting, based on everything that you have, your assets, right? There's so many variables and everybody's just trying to tweak in their own formula. And they've been figuring this out for a very long time. There's lots of agencies who do this as well. And the thing is that we know that AI in many contexts can actually be better at actually figuring out every one of those little knobs and dials, right? And so we've been building these automated campaigns. Performance Max is like a top one. And watching, it's been so fascinating because the first thing that happened was we put it out there and we are like, look, everything's about performance. If we can guarantee you higher performance, you'll adopt it, right? Like just put more of your budgets into this campaign. And we told the product team, like, it's not that easy. Just because you can get better performance does not mean that adoption is going to be there because you're not going to be able to explain what AI is actually doing. And if you can't be fully transparent on what it's doing, then you actually violate maybe some of the trust signal that the buyers really would want, right? So now it's been over the course of the last couple of years, how do you take the power of AI, apply it to get much better value to the customer, but you have to do it with transparency and with some parts of a control. But you got to do it in a way that you don't give them so much control that you basically let them go right back to what they were doing before, which is trying to tweak all the knobs and dials themselves, where they then actually put their performance at risk. Right? So this is like a really classic, obvious example of like applied AI where it's not about like a chat bot, right? It's about like really driving value in a very complex ecosystem. And now that we've gotten this far, now we're leveraging Gen AI to really help people with their assets, and assets are very complicated too. And you need so many of them. And if you're going to actually have automated buying across all these inventory, like you need to have assets. Well, that's very, very, it's like a great use case for AI as well, but you've got to do it with trust. So it gets very exciting when you can take the power of the technology and apply it in things that have been so complicated, but you have to balance that still with transparency and control for the user.
And one thing I think about is, as you're speaking, I almost thought of the word realism because I think the distance between the ideas we have as creatives, as businesses, and then the distance to customer, not only adoption, but use and repeat use, that little maze right there is kind of where the superpower of design leaders really come through. And so even with all this change, even with all this AI, we can still ground the entire conversation of like, yes, we want to do that, but here's how we actually need to address these like trust, right? So I think that's such an important thing to not forget and get caught up in just the pure advancement of AI, but really like, well, it comes back to adoption for, those people that are outside this core bubble.
That's right. And I do think too, I'm sure Kaaren and Ben have thoughts on this as well. It's I think I heard in one of your other podcasts, it's about sort of this definition of quality as well, right? And there's going to be quality as you apply that definition to, let's say, the models, but you have to have real clarity on quality as defined by your customer or your user. And that's very classic that you would get that from design professionals, right? And we have to go figure out how to get that in new ways, right? How to analyze that faster than we've ever analyzed it before, right? And build up a level of certainty, but also leverage that as a way to put guardrails in place, right? So that as we actually let 1,000 flowers bloom and like really lean into this era of innovation, that we actually help really well-intentioned technologists understand the human desire, human needs, and human like level of expectation for what good looks like, and then don't let them fall too far away from that, right?
Well,
And so
and
those guardrails are going to be really important.
related to that as well, I think is, as people start to use AI more and more, they start to trust it more and more, and the need for transparency is a little bit less, right? Once you get used to it. And so then the other thing we have to stay abreast of is how much transparency is needed and when, right? Like I still remember back when, Google Maps would tell you you were on your way home and it would be this long and people were, uncomfortable. And now totally normal that my car tells me where it thinks I'm going on a Tuesday afternoon because I go the same place every week. And so really that level of comfort does change, and that's also going to be dynamic as the usage starts to rise.
And it's got to be earned, right? Like you've got to earn it.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. And I think what's interesting with this technology, and I've tried to think through if this was the same case with other technology jumps or leaps. I don't think it was. What's interesting here is there will be part of the world that will be entirely AI to AI, right? Like automated. But certainly everything we've talked about so far, so long as a human will interact with this AI system, whatever it's going to be, that trust, that the ability to see what's going on and build the trust through that will be a requirement. I think that's really important. And I think same with, I think the Google Maps example is a good example because there were cases early on, right, where you ended somewhere in a dead end, or there was not even a road in the first place. And we see the same thing with LLMs and hallucination, is a good example where, right now you can't trust a lot of the information that you get. You have to verify it, and we need to make sure that we everywhere we apply this technology, we make it clear, essentially, where it's coming from. If there's a high confidence on the accuracy and the truthfulness of the information, and as Kaaren was saying, I think that'll over time obviously be different. I think the other part maybe though, that this is a technology that we also probably need to do more education around than the other technological leaps, because of its potential scale and potential impact. I'm not sure if we had to do that with mobile or even the personal computing revolution as much as we have to do with this, because of how directly, for example, LLMs have already impacted people's emotional state and so on and so forth. I wonder if this is a different kind of technological leap on that side.
I'm curious to kind of unpack the word pacing here. And it almost feels like the world is moving faster. And there's a sense of feeling at least what it feels in the design community. It's like, I heard what leaders say this yesterday. She's like, I'm studying AI every week and I'm still feeling so behind. And there's more coming every day. So how do I, as a leader, think and orient myself and ground myself, even though there's so much change? I would love to hear from the three of you, like, how do you deal with pacing as it really accelerates and the expectations are growing? So how are you guys dealing with this?
I think you just are very comfortable with knowing you don't know a lot, right? I mean, because there's so much out there. Of course, you're not going to feel like you have mastery of it all or you understand it all. And it's more about learning as you go. And then when a particular use case comes to bear that you think might be useful or your company thinks might be useful for playing with, then you go all in on that and you just start to solve particular types of problems, so that's how you become familiar with it. And again, when you're in your company, it's a team sport.
Yeah, I try to sorry, Kaaren.
Go ahead.
I try to tackle from two ends. One, play, just playing with everything that comes out, and I mean really playing. I have oftentimes I just boot up Cursor, or when Midjourney came out initially, and I just set aside a few hours and just play with it and figure out what happens, like really completely undirected, and get a sense for, this is interesting, or this is fun, or this isn't fun, or this is really frustrating, and trying to get a sense for kind of what works, what doesn't. And then the other part that I spend time on is talking to experts from very different fields and trying to get a sense for, what, how things might be applied, or what, ethical considerations are there, like more from a framework perspective of humanistic values, and trying to get a sense for that as well. Because I think given that everything is so fast, I believe we just need to build really robust value sets and frameworks that allow us to kind of rail in the technology. So that's a little bit of kind of how I try to approach it.
Yeah, I might be a little bit different. I don't know, but because I'm like sort of surrounded by technologists all day, every day they're actually creating so much of this. I give myself a little bit permission to avoid the trap of trying to keep up. Because I think that there's just, it's impossible. There's just no way. I could spend all day, every day, just reading docs, playing around with these tools, and I would still be behind if I did it 24/7, right? So for me, that's not helpful. And I also have witnessed and noticed that things change so fast that if I catch up in like a month or two, the bunch of swirl happened, and now I'm like, it's fine. Like I didn't need to understand all of that change. Like I just kind of need to be paying attention to the rhythm and like sort of where things are kind of going. And so what I'm doing is like trying to keep my ear out for, I think, what a lot of design leaders do. It's like you're trying to find the through lines. You're trying to actually see the patterns. You're trying to understand what the themes are that are actually starting to emerge. And that, for me, it becomes infinitely easier if I don't get sucked up into the vortex of the swirl. And granted, again, I'm in it with my bubble. And so like, I have to really be conscious of like staying out. And instead, I want to talk to real people in the world. Like I'm asking real people in the world, well, what are you using? How are you using it? And like sort of sitting in the humility of that. And then I provide value by bringing that back, much to the want of a lot of people that I work with. They're like, yeah, but, and I'm like, I mean, it's great that you guys all understand this, but we got a ways to go, right? And so I think that that's like, it's one of those things, but the only way that I can do that though, and I think still feel so confident, is because at whatever point in time that I'm like, okay, what can this technology do? Like I know who to go talk to. Mm-hmm. Or who to say, okay, you tell me if it could do this or this or this, right now. And then we can use it to, really get creative that way, which is really fun.
Well, and I think that, Suzanne, what you just laid out was a really important perspective that design leaders can take and be actionable. Part of our job is to understand how are regular people using this now and really bringing that back, and also really understanding those trends and starting to play with Cursor and Midjourney so that we do have a sense of whether or not it's those or something else. Like these are the types of things that are coming along and that are maturing, and something else is going to come and replace them, but it will be of a similar genre.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something so powerful here that I kind of want to double down on. And, Suzanne, you're saying you're surrounded by technologists, but I also think of you, and I'm thinking about she's like a humanist showing up with that point of view, representing that view in the business. And whether it's AI or the print era or the internet era or cloud or SaaS or whatever comes, it's like that humanist view never goes away because there's humans on this planet. That is where the value is created. So I find that so grounding to actually just continually reinforce that is an evergreen value, a role that design leaders can play no matter what comes at us.
That's right. And I think that, and I mean, if you kind of go back to like sort of the mobile transformation, that platform shift. It's like some of us were in companies where everybody had the latest and greatest devices.
Mm-hmm.
And we were so out of touch with the fact that most people had flip phones. But we were like a generation ahead of them. And part of that's like really important because you're like, oh, I'm going to steer where you're going. I'm going to help you get to like where we are. And so there's real vision that kind of comes from like being a little bit further ahead. But you just got to stay humble and grounded.
Well, and Suzanne, just to make that a concrete example, I remember with TurboTax and mobile, the big finding was that people were having trouble taking photos of their W-2s because the light was so bad and the cameras weren't so good, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Or there wasn't enough signal for them to be able to upload it. And so these were all of these issues, and same with, depositing a check. There were all these issues that were happening in the real world.
That's right.
That were just never expected by the technologists. Because to your point,
same with Google Maps. When we're sitting in Delhi or we're down in India,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's not loading fast enough, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're like sort of in the middle of someplace, and we don't have the latest data, right? So you just kind of forget about that when you're sitting in Seattle as an engineer driving a Tesla, and you forget like those people are actually on two-wheel motorcycles, going off-roading to kind of get to something, and they can't mount their phone on the handlebar, so they have to memorize the directions. So like if we're going to give turn-by-turn directions, we're going to have to do it by landmarks, not by street names, because there's also not street names and a bunch of, but so all of that like was completely not understood or internalized. There's no experience with that. So
I think there is in all of this humanistic perspective, I think what Suzanne was saying about talking to real people, I think from a really strategic point of view, now design leaders, and their interaction with the C-suite, there's real value there to be unlocked, and going out into the world and talk to real people and trying to identify potential growth opportunities where this technology can actually be applied in entirely new use cases or in entirely new ways, and unlock real business value. Because so much focus is on the pure technology, I think there's a real value for design leaders to applying that human-centered lens and saying, hey, there's entirely, there's strategy value to be unlocked here. And it's maybe something worth talking about for everyone who's listening, who's talking to the C-suite and wants to also unlock value beyond just a current portfolio. I think that's something probably worth touching on, because we've talked a lot about, applying it to what is. But I think that there is this bigger question of what could be, where could it be useful?
Well, Ben, we were talking, I think that I was hosting an event not that long ago, and with Gordon and some other folks in the Bay Area. And, there have been for a very long time, us as design leaders recognize that there's big problems, but it's almost intractable to solve those problems. You couldn't solve it. You couldn't solve it at scale, or you couldn't solve it at a certain level of quality, or you couldn't actually move the outcome because we weren't able to do it with the technology that we had at hand. And so I think that it's an extraordinary moment where we can really look at problems with a very different lens of possibility. Like things that have been intractable forever, like now become possibilities really quickly.
Yeah.
And that's so exciting. Like when we used to have to fight like all these product teams just to like drive simplification in our product experiences. Like that's an example of like applying it to today's problems. But like there's also like we've so many times identified opportunities, and it was like, we can't do that. We can't do that. And now it's like, oh, well, let's revisit some of those.
I think about one thing to maybe help wrap even, it reminds me back in school of the Everett Rogers diffusion of innovations framework, right? Innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then laggards. And I think design leaders have such a elegant way to think through like the different stages of risk, adoption appetite, and what value needs to be created as you start to really think about like widely available products, right? And so AI right now, I think is still a bit in the early adopter stage, right? A lot of the technologists, a lot of the, entrepreneurs, but if we're talking about like our families, our friends, the whole wide world, that's a completely different dimension of understanding. And I think that's where like, actually there might be even more of a need for design and research to really clarify what those use cases are as this business opportunity grows even larger. So that's something that felt really grounding to me to hear you guys kind of talk about that importance of that use case clarity, the humanist view. And then as companies move from early adopter to really that majority is, there's going to be a tremendous amount of work that has to be done if these businesses want to sustain durable value.
And just to wrap it up, going back to another concept we talked about, what are those use cases? And then what does quality look like for the customer outcome that we're seeking?
Yeah, exactly. Those are tools that we have as designers and user researchers always applied, right? And bringing this to this new era, I think, has a huge opportunity to unlock business value, and where design leaders can really take responsibility, take charge, and building a narrative based on real human needs, as Suzanne was saying, problems that we weren't able to solve, right? In healthcare, in personalized education, right? Where we can now finally apply this technology, this powerful technology, in ways that are truly useful and might give many companies an opportunity to not just keep incrementally growing their bottom line, but actually potentially making a massive leap into a new category, or
Hmm.
really deliver value that they couldn't before at all.
Yeah. To give kind of a wrap up to this episode, Suzanne, do you have like any closing words of guidance to the listeners of how to, wrap this all up? I'll leave it to you.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I think, look, it's an exciting time. I think that, you have to be thinking about this. Um, I think not in the day to day, like, speed of like how much you have to change, but like really stay grounded in sort of what we know is durable when it comes to the practice of design, when it comes to the practice of being human centered, when it comes to the practice of like helping to drive strategy, and when it comes to the practice of actually delivering executional excellence. All those things remain the same. You will have opportunities to deliver that a little bit differently, and that'll be very exciting. And so you just keep continuing to build your skills, but stay on your front toes, right? Like that's a good thing. Like stay on your toes. Don't fall into any massive traps of like, feeling like you have to keep up with everybody and you're behind all the time. That's just not true. Like we're all learning all the time. Stay in network with each other. Like I love the Design Exec Council. We all get to help, inspire each other with like, have you seen this? Do you know this? What are your teams doing here? What are your teams doing there? And I think that as we actually stay connected as community and as practitioners and as leaders, we will absolutely remain like a vital part of making this technology accessible to humans around the globe. And I'm really grateful, Gordon, to you and to Ben and to Kaaren for having me today. So thank you.
Suzanne, thank you for such a poetic ending. And if anything, I feel more grounded, and I really hope more leaders feel more grounded as a result of this conversation. Let us know in the comments, and if there's any other questions you guys, want us to kind of noodle on a little further. So with that, I wish you all a thank you for listening to this episode, and thank you to our three guests and Suzanne for joining us today.